Well, it looks like we're in for a hard landing. Look to make sure that you keep your jobs, because there may be as many as 10 million people losing their jobs when this economy lands hard and goes into the next recession. Today I want to talk to you about an article where there was an interview of, now let me get this up here, interview of a former Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers. Now, Larry Summers has a great credential list. He was a university professor at Harvard. He was the president emeritus of that same university. He was He was the Secretary of the Treasury under President Clinton and the director of the National Economic Council under Barack Obama. Plenty of good, solid experience. And so what he is saying is this. He says he never joined the team transitory movement. In other words, remember how many times the politicians have said, oh, inflation is just transitory.
These bottleneck effects have been larger than anticipated, and FOMC participants have revised up their projections for inflation, notably for this year. As these transitory supply effects abate, inflation is expected to drop back toward our longer-run goal, and the median inflation projection falls from 3.4% this year to 2.1% next year and 2.2% in 2023.
As our economy has come roaring back, we've seen some price increases. Some folks have raised worries that this could be a sign of persistent inflation. But that's not our view. Our experts believe, and the data shows, that most of the price increases we've seen were expected and are expected to be temporary.
Well, that was their doublespeak for saying, oh, it's just going to be temporary. And then you had all the talking heads on all the major media saying, oh, it's just temporary. Oh, it's just temporary. And in fact, you have so many people saying that this inflation, oh, it's nothing. I mean, 8% inflation, that's really nothing. Don't believe them. Don't believe that the ramifications of all that has been done in order to combat COVID was well overdone, and now we're going to pay the price in a big way. Here is what he says. He says, the members of the Federal Reserve Board who thought inflation would be a temporary phenomenon, instead he warned early and often that massive fiscal and monetary stimulus unleashed in response to the impact of the COVID pandemic would result in the economy overheating. He was right. Consumer prices rose 8.6% year over year in May. It was 8.3% the previous month and 8.5% the previous month to that. That is the fastest pace that it has run in 40 years. We have to go clear back to 1980 to see inflation during that time that was higher. So he goes on to tell why he believed that. And that's what I think is significant about this particular article. Because not only does he say it, he backs it up with the logic behind the statement. And so what I want to do is talk about the logic behind the statement and explain it if it looks like it may need explaining. So he says, I used a fairly straightforward method. I looked at the size of the output gap, or the shortfall of the economy compared with its maximum potential output. Now, how those two things are calculated, probably only an economist would actually know. But he says, and I looked at the degree of stimulus being applied. What I saw was a shortfall of payroll incomes, perhaps $30 billion a month, compared with a fiscal stimulus of $150 billion a month. Okay, so we've got a stimulus of 5 times more than was needed. Okay, I saw the substantial overhang of savings that would be available in 2021. In addition to the consequences of negative real or inflation-adjusted interest rates and substantial expanding of the federal balance sheet, or the Fed balance sheet. Okay, I performed some quick calculations comparing the excess of stimulus in past episodes, including the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. In retrospect, too little stimulus was applied back then. But the stimulus this time, relative to the output gap, was 5 times as large as it was in 2008 to 2009. And no one believed that we should have had 5 times as much stimulus in 2008 and 2009. Then I accounted for the risk that in a post-COVID environment, supply would be reduced. Well, we've seen that with all the supply chain difficulties. Supply has been reduced. Between the demand and supply factors, in other words, with supply reduced and demand still probably where it should have been and more because you've had more money to spend, those two things reinforce each other. Significant inflation seemed a substantial likelihood. So people out there right now, the economists that are in the public eye right now, are really being critical of what this man is saying. But I have adhered to what he said ever since I started seeing the numbers come out. And it's nice, it's refreshing to see somebody actually back up the things that I've heard. He says, the problem came when, in response to the pandemic, we decided to inject 12% or more in gross domestic product in fiscal stimulus. 12% more gross domestic product? That's huge. 12% in addition to what the gross domestic product was doing at the time. The latest CPI report makes it clear that inflation is simply not coming down of its own volition. Team Transitory was wrong, or the people that wanted to say it was temporary, they were wrong. It's going to require a substantial economic shock, a substantial increase in unemployment, and reduction in GDP growth to bring inflation running above 8% and accelerating down to acceptable levels. He continues on with a statement at the end. He says, why should anyone think that inflation is going to come down from the 8% range to the 2% range? Now, he gets the 2% range from what the Fed target is. Their targeted range for inflation is at 2%. Without unemployment rising above the Fed's estimate of its normal rate. Well, normal rate is between 3 and 5% 3 and 5% unemployment. And he believes that estimate is going to be too low anyway. My guess is that you will see further increases in projected inflation, projected unemployment, and projected interest rates. He also says the Fed's 0.75% interest rates was desirable, but all the hype that they parroted it out with was probably not good for the Fed's credibility, because they're going to have to keep on goosing it in order to make sure that inflation comes down. But like I said in my last video, he says in this article that there could be close to 10 million people that could be out of a job based on the stimulus that's based on the restrictions that the Federal Reserve is going to put on things. 10 million people is a lot of people. And the people that are going to be hurt worst are the people who can afford it least. Those housewives and those husbands, those young people who don't have the adequate education yet, or who are supporting a family and have decided not to go to school. Those people are going to get hurt a whole lot worse than people in my situation with an education. It's going to behoove all of us to be helpful to our neighbors that are not quite as well prepared so that they can make it through. If you like what you hear on this, and if it's good, well, informative, whatever, if you find it valuable, please hit the subscribe button, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Thanks.